Welcome back to Christ in Me Ministry. My name is Cameron, and for this video, I'm going to be explaining kind of how Jesus came into my life and where it started, where we are now. So I went to church really early as a kid. I went to a Baptist church, and I was baptized maybe around 11 years old, 12 years old or so. We went to church almost every Sunday. At a certain point, we kind of dropped off. Maybe when I was a teenager, perhaps. It's kind of hard to remember. But for a long time, from around the time I was a teenager to my early 30s, I did not go to church. I didn't even really think about it too much. I thought about it on occasion. Sometimes you have those kind of fleeting passing moments. Maybe you're driving on the highway or whatever. You pass a church and you say, maybe I should stop in there. Maybe I should see what that's about again. And then it would basically just be that, and it would pass away, and the thought wouldn't come again. But it would creep up kind of more and more kind of as I turned 30 and 31, and kind of as a couple more years passed. And well, there was a point in my life, in the later part of my life just recently, where I for the past 5 years, well, for the past 5 years minus except for the last year or so, I worked for a large corporation. Um, I was very successful in this corporation. I started at basically the lowest rung at a call center, and then I worked there for about a year and a half, and then I promoted into as an analyst in their legal department, and I worked on their legal team for 3 years, and within those 3 years, I promoted every year, so three times, until I became a senior legal analyst on that team. And then make sure we're still recording. We are. Okay, we're good. So at year 4 at that company, I was a senior legal analyst. And then after that, I applied and promoted into a compliance manager for I won't say what for exactly, but it was a major job. So it involved managing the inventory for about 4,000 different facilities for this company. So big time job. I mean, 6-figure salary, stock options, huge bonuses, the works basically, the kind of job that, someone might dream about having basically, especially coming out of college. Although I personally graduated college, before I signed on to this company, but still, a very great job by any standards, especially financially with all the benefits and everything, the vacation time and all this. But then, about 6 months into this job, just something didn't sit right with me. By that point, I had a bit saved up, and for a while there, for I'd say starting at about year 3 into this company, I was like maybe an analyst 2 in the legal department. I started to have this idea, I really kind of want to get out of this. I want to do something else. But I was really thinking about, I want to sell books. I want to write books. I want to sell books. I've been a writer for a long time, just writing privately, more as a hobby. But I thought, I should try to do this and, try to make an income out of it if I can. I knew going into those thoughts already that it was a really challenging prospect to do. But that really hasn't stopped me. Approaching something challenging really has not stopped me in life from trying to do it anyway. Um, I mean, the same goes for that high paying salary job. I mean, I beat out, like 110 people out of that interview who were all highly qualified. And so that really just, it boosted me up even more. But anyways, about year three, I decided, I kind of want to get out of this company. And so, but I kept getting promotions. I kept making more money. I kept getting more worldly, earthly benefits. And, whenever that's happening to you at such an accelerated rate, uh, it's kind of, it kind of traps you with golden handcuffs. It's kind of hard to get yourself out of that, because you're in such a good position. And it's hard to think about much else because the more promotions you get, the higher up you move in a company, the more responsibilities you have, and uh, the less time you have to really do anything else. And I found that especially to be true when I moved into that final salary position. I mean, you're working all the time. You're working on your days off even. I mean, even on your days off, you're still getting emails. If there's emergency stuff, you have to hop on, you have to respond to it. So you really don't have a day off basically. You're working every day all the time. And it really doesn't give you the opportunity to kind of think outside of that, and especially about religion, about Jesus. So, and I wasn't thinking about that really at the time. Um, so about 6 months into that salary position, I had a good chunk saved up, and I decided, I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to leave this company, and I'm going to write books and try to sell them. By that point, I wrote about 3 science fiction novels in full, so I had some already on the back burner that I could sell. And I was basically just going to continue writing sequels and I wrote a few other standalones. So I was like, I'm going to give it a shot. And if I run out of money, worst case, I'll just find another job. No big deal. And, I've always been the kind of person where I really don't need much to survive. My expenses in life are very minimal. I don't have a big family to take care of. I hope I do get one day. I want one. I'm just saying I don't have one right now, at this moment. And especially not when I left. I think if I would have had a family, in that job, I would not have left. I'd still be there probably. Because it would be the right decision for my family. But now I can kind of take on those risks as a solo guy. So I did, and I left, and I started writing. And I'm a really hard worker. I write basically every day. Lately in the past month, I've been taking a break, but that's really the first break I've taken in like 10 years, basically, almost. Within that 10 years, I've basically written about 1,500 words a day on average. But yeah, that was my plan. So I had a game plan. I had the work ethic. It's not like it was my first day writing novels. I've done it before, and I've scrapped tons. Practicing the craft of writing before I even wrote those 3 that I ended up completing. So I was like, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. And one thing I noticed, I guess right away when I left the company is, wow, this is great. I'm glad I left. I'm still glad I left. I do not regret leaving 1 second. So there's that. But also something kind of funny happened, because when you're unemployed, you naturally have a lot of free time, and I started kind of watching more YouTube videos, and I'm trying to think back now, and it's hard for me to think when it really started. I want to say it was fairly early into me leaving that corporation that I just kind of started getting into religious videos, Christian videos, Catholic videos. I'm not a Catholic right now. I'm trying to join in on the program, and but I have to go through this thing called RCIA, which is like 8 months of classes at my local diocese. So I'm still not technically a Catholic, although it's funny because as I started to research, um, oh, I now know what got me into it. Okay, so it's funny. So writing science fiction books, you want to do a lot of research, to try to get certain aspects of the book correct. What you want to make sure, the spaceship you're talking about can actually do what it's doing, or whatever the case may be. I write more science fiction fantasy, so there is a lot of fake elements, if you will, that couldn't be possible in real life. But regardless, I still like to do a lot of research to try to get a bunch of ideas. Well, during one of my rabbit holes of research, I discovered some videos from scientists. I can't remember their name, but they were talking. They were like astrologers or astrologists, or not astrologists, astronomers, and physicists, and they started talking about fractal patterns in nature. It's kind of these like repeating patterns that happen across nature. And one of the physicists started talking about this connection and the connection from these fractal patterns to God, and how this is clearly kind of a sign of intelligent design in the universe, because a universe that is designed by a creator is going to have sort of intelligent, even repeatable patterns. And that's kind of what these fractal patterns, I recommend you look it up. It's very fascinating. So just to give you a brief example, if you look at a leaf, it has kind of this repeating pattern that starts small and grows larger throughout the leaf. That's kind of the thing that I'm talking about. But look it up. There's tons of examples that occur naturally in nature. It's a very fascinating topic. But so, like, another example is, now I'm not a scientist, so if I mess some of this up, forgive me. I do write science fiction and fantasy, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert in science or by any stretch of the imagination. But another example, this isn't a fractal pattern, but I don't know what you would call this, but if you look at an atom, you see, one of the smallest, units in the universe is an atom, and how electrons, will orbit that atom. Well, that looks exactly like what a solar system does when planets orbit a star. So that's just kind of an example of how there's kind of a repeating pattern on the very micro scale and also on the very macro scale, which is extremely fascinating. So I started looking into all of this, and just really getting fascinated by God, by God's creation of the entire universe. I wanted to know, more about this creation, beyond the scope of Earth. I wanted to know about solar systems, about galaxies, about nebulas, about the confines of the universe, about, I got into research on different planes of existence, how that works, how there may be planes of existence that interact with ours that we can't necessarily sense with our limited senses, that we interact with, such as like the spiritual world, and kind of how angels and demons interact with us, with our world and the universe at large. So I just really went into a deep dive. I bought a bunch of books, I read them all. And I really just became fascinated and started watching a bunch of long form videos with, so there's this man named Bishop Barron, who is really fascinating, really intelligent Catholic bishop. I highly recommend checking him out. There's this man named John Burke, who I think he's a doctor, Dr. John Burke, who studies near-death experiences, and he wrote a book called Imagine Heaven, which is very, very great. And basically, it tells the experiences that people envision after they clinically die, but they actually come back. Usually, this is like during surgery or something, but there's other instances as well. And I really just started deep diving more and more. And I even I bought my first fact. I bought my first rosary, and I highly recommend getting a rosary. I truly believe that there is spiritual power that comes from having a rosary, keeping it on your person, and praying the rosary prayer. I mean, personally, it has given me just such a tremendous sense of peace. I try to do it every day. I sometimes skip days and I feel bad about it when I do. But the whole prayer takes maybe 20, 30 minutes, depending on how fast you do it. And it really just kind of cleanses for me. I can't say what it'll do for you, but I believe you'll have similar effects. So for me, what it does is, so the rosary prayer allows you to reflect on the different stages of Jesus's life and of Mary's life. And for instance, there's one day you kind of pray through the different elements of Jesus's crucifixion, but you can look into it more. But after praying through the whole prayer, which is you can do it mentally, I like to do it verbally, just speaking it aloud. But after I'm done, I just get this tremendous sense of peace and calming and assurity, and just kind of feel a lot closer to Jesus and to God, and to Mary, the Queen of Heaven and Earth, Jesus's mother. And it just makes me feel like everything is going to be okay. No matter the hardships that are happening in my life or around me, everything is going to be okay. There is something after this life, and that is eternity. And it's really the question of, are you going to spend it in communion with God for eternity, or are you going to spend it in hell, which is a place you don't want to go? And I'm sure I'm going to have videos dedicated just to that topic in the future, because I've researched a lot about that as well. And I've researched a lot about purgatory as well. I'd love to talk about all of that. Again, I'm not an official Catholic just yet. I just feel like there are truths in the universe, and if it's true, it's true. And there, things are either true, real, or not real. And I just feel like a lot of these things are extremely real. You know, for instance, doing the rosary prayer, it makes me not want to sin. It makes me want to stay away from sin. And I used to be a big sinner, let me tell you. I'm not proud of that fact. It is a fact. I'm just giving you the facts. I'm not going to go into exactly what my sins were. That's more of a private thing between me and God, me and Jesus. But I was, all Christians are sinners. Everyone in the world is a sinner. The only thing you can do, and what I've started to do, is pray to Jesus, pray to God to help you walk away from sin, to refuse sin. That is called repentance. That is called, basically, you identify how you're sinning, and then you try to stop sinning. It's a long process. You're not going to do it overnight. For me, I did it one by one. So, you identify one sin, you try to stop doing it. Maybe you relapse, if you will. You sin again. Well, just get back on the train, stop doing it. And then you just keep doing that until you finally cut yourself off from the sin. And then you move on to the next sin, and you do the same exact thing. You do this for every sin that you normally do, that you normally practice. And eventually you'll get to the point where you have cut out like 90% of the sins that you have partaken in, and your life is going to improve dramatically. Let me tell you, your mind is going to be clear. You're going to be more emotionally stable. You're going to be happier, more at peace, more content, more calm. You're going to have better sleep, all of it. And the main thing to start with is two things. So one is praying to God, praying to Jesus Christ directly. Say, Jesus, please help me. I'm a sinner. Help me identify my sins. Fill me with the wisdom to identify my sins, and help me stop my sins. Help me stop sinning. And He will help you. He will help you. You know, I'll get into another video, kind of how that process looks. We're kind of approaching the time here on this video, but yeah, no, Jesus has helped my life tremendously, and the kind of story I just went through is kind of how I kind of got involved in uh, how I basically became more connected with Jesus and more connected with God after quitting this really high paying job um, that I got. And I don't regret it at all, because the benefits that come with trying to step away from sin and devote your life to Jesus is way more fulfilling in this limited temporal existence in this earth than anything else you will ever do. Trust me on that. So, thank you for watching Christ in Me Ministry. I hope this video has helped you. If it does, like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're feeling extra generous, you can, donate using the PayPal link in the description, and all that money is going to go directly to helping the needy, to helping the homeless, and building those care packages that I described in another video. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you stick around for another video. Thanks.